Hi, I'm Jeff Johnston, host of the Living Undeterred podcast. This is a reminder that we're going on tour next summer. Yes, that's right, we're going on tour. The Living Undeterred US Tour 2022. We're leaving on May 9th next summer. We're going to every state and we're raising $1 million. That's the plan to change the narrative on mental health, substance abuse, and addiction. We need your help, though. I cannot do this alone. I know there's a lot of people out there interested in this project of ours. You can go to our website, www.livingundeterred.com. We need volunteers. We need state partnerships. We need sponsors. We need as many people as we can to get out there and help those people that need help to change the narrative on mental health, substance abuse, and addiction. Again, go to livingundeterred.com and click on the Living Undeterred icon, and all the information is there. Again, thank you very much for the support, and as always, keep living undeterred. Hello, I'm Jeff Johnston, host of the Living Undeterred podcast, and today we have a real treat today. Not very often I get to have two guests on the show. Today, I am honored to have two guests that are becoming really good friends of mine. I think after this show, you will see bits and pieces of each of our stories intertwined together. And we have met now at this crossroads of our lives. All of us are at a stage where we've been vulnerable. We've talked about certain things that have happened to us with the hope that this can better humanity and help people get through the day-to-day battles that they're going through. So with that, again, I want to thank everyone for being on the watching the Living or listening to the Living Undeterred podcast. We've been going strong since about January. You can subscribe. You can like us on all the outlets, Spotify, YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. And without much further ado, I'm going to introduce our two guests, and we are going to navigate through a lot of difficult topics today. Some topics that for some people, I think this would be a time to maybe throw a trigger warning out there. And I'm sure Molly, when this does post, will have a trigger warning. We're going to talk about some sensitive issues today. We're going to talk about sex abuse. We're going to talk about heroin overdose. We're going to talk about alcohol-related deaths. We're going to talk about trauma. We're going to talk about a lot of things. So my two guests, Antarctic Mike. Mike is well known on the Living Undeterred podcast. You were on our live stream, Mike, and you were also one of my early guests on the original podcast. And we talked in depth about your story, about perseverance and endurance, and some of the personal traumatic events you went through with yourself and Angela. And then Wayne Coffey, we're going to introduce you as well and talk about your absolutely amazing, heart-wrenching, but very admirable, heroic story in what you talked about and how we're going to help people navigate through some tough things today. So with that, Antarctic Mike, Wayne Coffey, which one of you wants to introduce themselves first?
Age
before beauty. I like that.
I was going to talk about Wayne. For those of you that don't know me, I became an Antarctic and an endurance junkie years ago when I ended up going to Antarctica twice to run a marathon and an ultra marathon. And I put myself through 2 years of mentally rigorous training. Now, the interesting part of the story is, in hindsight, I discovered the reason why I became such an Antarctic addict, let's call it. It was to really get me through some of the battles that I go through as a spouse who's married to somebody who has a series of disabilities. And Angela, my wife, we've been married for almost 32 years. And the battle, she fell off a mountain 125 feet back in 1985. Wow. And the consequences of this go on. And I mean, it's like a well, like it just doesn't ever end. And the difficulties have been like I could shoot a whole film just about that story. But my point is, it's really made me, I think, a lot more sensitive to people who are going through this. I've watched her go off prescription medication. I've seen mental hurdles. I mean, I've just seen it all. And then I met Wayne back, when was it, like in March or April of this year?
March. March.
March. Okay, I was scheduled to go to a speaking engagement, and Wayne was hosting this particular meeting. And he says, "Hey, let's go to dinner, the night before if you get in early enough." And I always schedule my trips to try and allow for time to do that so I can get to know people. And Wayne and I sat down to dinner, and I have to tell you, I've been speaking across the country for more than a dozen years, and I've sat down to a gazillion dinners with people in every state, just about. Never in my whole life had I sat down with a complete stranger at a dinner table and walked away from it, a couple of hours later going,
Right.
this is like one of the best friends in my whole life. I felt like I'd known Wayne for half of my lifetime, even though I'd only met him 2 hours prior. And I guess that sort of teased Wayne up to tell his story, but his story just made me a fan.
Yeah, I agree with that, Mike. First time I talked to Wayne was over an hour and a half, I think, driving up to our vacation in Minnesota, and I put the phone down and said, I've got to get this story out there. This is a new thing that I wasn't very familiar with. I didn't go through what Wayne went through. I'm sure I know a lot of people that have but haven't talked about it. So with that, Wayne, I guess we'll have you introduce yourself and maybe give a little background about what makes you living undeterred, I guess, is what I would say.
Sure, and I love the living undeterred because for those of us who have been through life challenges, and I do believe everybody is on a journey and has a story to tell in some way or fashion. Some of us are luckier than others in being able to overcome those challenges. And for me, the overcoming of this great challenge of child sex abuse was finding a mate who believed in me enough to be relentless in making sure that I finally got help. Because if dealing with child sex abuse, especially for men, is very difficult because we absolutely believe that we have tattooed on our forehead abused. So we, as so many of us hear from other speakers, we put a mask on. And that mask is, hey, look over here, because I don't want you to look at what I feel is the real person. I know I've shared with both Mike and Jeff, but I think it's important for sharing with everybody that those of us who have been sexually abused, the average age of a male to come forward in their life is 52. So It's 52 years, I can only tell you, of hell. I was lucky that at age 42, I was able to finally confront the demon. And the demon is it's real and it's in your brain. And I just would like to explain, and Jeff or Mike, stop me at any time if you do have a question. I don't believe I am a hero. I believe that I am somebody that was given a gift. And I'll come back to the words of Monty Roberts, the horse whisperer, who challenged me to start my nonprofit, No More Stolen Childhoods. And he challenged me that I had a story to tell. As Mike always will tell you, everybody's got a story.
Yeah.
And the story was that between the ages of 5 and 12, I was sexually abused by my uncle, who also was my godfather. In our family, your godfather was very important. But you can only imagine that at age 5, and most of us can't think back to age 5,
Right.
that I was seduced. And this is really important for people to understand, that you as a child are seduced for 6 to 9 months before a sexual act of any kind occurs. And what does that seduction do? The seduction makes you as a child believe that what is happening to you is your fault. And that's how they trap you mentally. And if you think of a child's brain, until the age of 12, I mean, we're getting younger and younger with puberty, we do not act with logic. A child acts with emotion.
Right.
So the emotion gets turned around from what we're used to. And I hid it in a number of ways. Mainly, I say in my book that I wrote in 2007 that the scouting saved my life, because it finally gave me an avenue where I could use my talents and skills outside of what was happening to me internally. And it made me want to excel in everything that I did. So go ahead, Jeff. I see you have a question.
Well, no, I just wanted to put Wayne's book up here. I read it again last night. I've read it twice now. And I'm at a loss for words, to be honest with you, Wayne. It really opened my eyes to this horrendous. I don't know
use the word I like to use, Jeff?
Yeah, that helped me out there. I'm struggling.
Heinous.
Thank you.
I don't believe there's another illness mentally that touches all five senses at any one time. That a sight, a smell, a touch, or a sound can take me back to what I call the Grand Canyon in my mind of what was etched for 7 years.
You know, as I read the book and I look at, and I won't, and I would really, really suggest that if anybody wants to read a really heartfelt, honest, raw book on a topic that just doesn't get discussed enough, is Wayne's book. And I can have information on our sites and so forth for everybody that's interested in getting it. But 39 million survivors of childhood sex abuse in America today. And this was the stat that Mike and I went back and forth on. Matter of fact, we had dinner. I went to see Mike speak in Omaha for a Vistage presentation. And we went out for dinner afterwards. And we just sat around and looked around the restaurant thinking, okay, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys in this room, men and women, have been sexually abused before the age 18. And we just looked around the room going, I wonder which ones in this room were the ones that were sexually abused. And that really hit home to Mike and I, Wayne, when I read your book and I saw that statistic, is if you think about that, like a school teacher, and you have an average classroom of 20 kids, there's 2 to 4 kids, maybe 3 to 6 kids in that classroom that have been sexually abused. And that's at an age before they got into substance abuse and all the other things that can build a foundation of poor choices on top of that. So I guess the question I have for you, Wayne, where was the pivot point from victim to advocate? I mean, what happened in your life that pivoted you from many people using this as a victim for the rest of their life, drinking themselves to death or maybe getting into whatever, or there's some people using it as a way to be advocacy towards a certain passionate issue like you have. So where was that moment for you?
The moment was an afternoon on a sales call. I was listening to the radio between calls, and they interviewed a gentleman called Dr. Dan Allender, who had written the book, The Wounded Heart. And I listened to the interview, and I was stunned. And I thought that it finally came to me. Now, in the background, I need to tell everybody, as I said earlier on, having a mate that helps and believes in you is so important, because my wife Dolores was constantly trying to get me to get help. And I literally drove from that sales call, walked in the front door and said, I'm going to convict my uncle of sexually abusing me, and I'm going to go into therapy. And that was in 1998. So it was a cathartic, but I also didn't understand, Jeff and Mike, that the journey I was going to be taking was long and arduous. And it's probably the toughest thing I've ever done in my life.
Well, the most eye-opening part of the book for me was when you went through the trial and so forth, and certain individuals, and I'll let you talk more about that, literally didn't support you, didn't believe you, and you document this in the book, and I'm just thinking, wow, that tells you how in denial family members can be about these things. Like, there's no way Wayne has to be making this up.
It's the big secret. And right. I remember my wife was kind of hesitant and said, are you really sure you're going to go through with this? And I said, well, I'm so sure that I'm going to call my parents tonight and say I want to have dinner with them. And when I went home and had dinner with my parents, my father never said a word. And my mother, because it was her brother, attack me is the best way that I can say. And this is, I say that only because most of us go through that. We become the black sheep of the family because we have unveiled the secret that no family wants to have come out. Because again, there's no other heinous crime out there, in my opinion, than child sex abuse. But it doesn't mean you can't overcome. And after 8 years of counseling and a lot of hard work, I was able to heal. Now, I say to everybody, and I have to, part of our mission statement for No More Stolen Childhoods was helping people with permanently scarred lives. And people say, well, why would you have an organization that has permanently scarred people? You know, you want to hear something at the outcome, somebody's going to be well. The permanently scarred means that still to this day, I have that Grand Canyon of memories in my mind, but I've learned how to deal with that memory and how when a touch or sight or sound can suck me back, I can go above and beyond that. And I also believe that you can't peel the onion back all at one time.
You know, Wayne, Mike said something that resonated with me early in our relationship, and he always writes in his books, you know, keep conquering. But Mike talks about, you know, small wins. Like you got to have wins. You got to have like win the day, win the moment. And I kind of look at the traumatic event I went through, losing my son and my wife. And that's true. You know, deal with grief, deal with trauma. You've got to not sit there and go, well, I'm just going to wake up one day and be over it, right? And Mike, you talked about this a lot on your podcast when you were on my show earlier about small victories, about win the moment, win the day. Do you mind elaborating? Yeah, I see Pace the Penguin. All right. No, I have to laugh because Pace represents a great metaphor, I guess, or a way to look at life. You know, you're not going to wake up, and Wayne, I'm sure you could agree. I don't wake up each morning saying, all right, I'm over the death of my son. I'm over the death of my wife. You know, it doesn't work that way. Mike, what are your thoughts on that, Mike?
No, that's very true. I think the thing that impressed me most about Wayne, when you go back to that dinner, when you called your parents and said, okay, I'm coming over for dinner and we got to talk. When you made the decision that you were going to, you know, take the bottle off the genie bottle, or the cap off the genie bottle. From what I recall from our discussions, that event basically put you and your mom on separate roads, did it not?
Absolutely.
And you're still on separate roads, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I mean, and when you told me that, I thought to myself, sometimes the price of confrontation, sometimes the price we have to pay to live by the truth is going to cost us our relationship with our mom. And in this case, it literally cost you your relationship with your mom. Because you could have clearly made a choice to back off. Oh, okay, well, we won't go there, Mom.
Well, many have, I'm sure.
I'm sure.
There's probably more that have done that, Mike, by far, that did what Wayne did.
And I thought to myself, that story has so much horsepower for the real world because it's bigger than sexual abuse. It's about the price of the truth. And if you look at our world today, you know, you see all the polarization and the bickering and the fighting and, you know, the black and the white and the money and the no money. And we know what all the issues are. But those are not the issues. One of the key central issues that's wrong in our society today is the fact that we don't have enough people, men, women, and kids, confronting the truth at any cost. We don't have enough of them. And I got to believe that looking at the truth in the eye and confronting it. Now, I realize, to Jeff's point earlier, it's not like we can wake up one day and just go, okay, well, I'm ready to do it just because it's the right thing to do. Wayne, you and I have talked many, many times about how you have to be ready for that moment. And when you heard that interview on that radio as you were driving around in between sales calls, that was your moment. And you knew the window was open.
Correct.
And I think for the listeners, you know, I think it's fair to say that you don't have to, you know, push the button of truth necessarily immediately because it's the right thing to do. You have to be ready to do it. And I can tell you from my own story from Angela, Angela healed from from the things that happened to her, from her trauma, many years after the fact, as you did, Wayne, but she was ready. And she knew when she was ready. Nobody pushed her in that direction. She had to carry herself to that point and then make that decision herself. And she's taken very small steps. But, little by little, a little becomes a lot. And that's exactly what you experienced. But I still shake my head when I tell people your story, and I think that's the price of the truth. Sometimes it's going to cost you your family.
But
it can't get a whole lot more expensive than that, right?
And the issue is not that the love of your family isn't important to you.
Right.
You learn because you so desperately. We are tribal people. Human beings are tribal.
Absolutely.
So we desperately want to be in that group. And what we find is that by going that route and staying in that toxic culture, and that's what I would get physically ill when I go to my parents' house. I just would get, because I knew that what I had unwrapped was the genie bottle, and it wasn't a nice genie that was coming out, and it's you have to learn. My faith tells me this, that you can forgive, but forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. And people need to people have asked me over and over, well, have you forgiven your uncle? Well, for a long period of time, no. But then I finally believe that if I don't forgive, then it eats at me.
Right.
But there's no way that I would reconcile. And that's a big, big difference in the reconciliation.
I want to ask you this question, but I'm going to frame it in a different way than I originally was going to frame it. I'm not going to ask you, do you regret anything? Because I think going back in the past and playing that game is not healthy. Yet I want to ask you, using the benefit of hindsight, are there things you would have done differently? And I'm not talking about the actual event that happened to you. I'm talking about post the event, the 20 or 30 years that went on. Now looking backwards at those times, what would you have done differently to get yourself where you are today, but maybe in a quicker way?
I'm not so sure that's possible, Jeff. I believe what Mike was saying is so true with Angela's taking the baby steps. I wasn't ready mentally to handle the pain that I was going to have to go through.
Sure.
And if you remember the chapter in the book called Blow Up Sunday, I'm a pretty intelligent individual. I'm not the brightest, but I have some smarts about me. I couldn't understand why every Sunday and holiday, I would blow up my wife or my kids. And it took about 6 to 8 months of counseling. And the doctor said, so let's talk about, what did you do on Sundays and holidays? Went to my grandfather's. Guess who lived with my grandfather?
Right.
My uncle.
Right.
So I couldn't understand why I couldn't, in 42, let's say 30 years, I couldn't understand why that was. I wasn't ready, and I wasn't capable of digesting that information until things evolved. And that's why it took 8 years. And that's why you can't go from the outer layer to the core immediately, because mentally and physically, I don't believe you can handle it. Now, I will also tell you that, I do speaking on the topic, and I have heard stories that the people will say, well, I want what you have, Wayne. And I would say, well, it's taken me 9, 10, 15 years to get there. But I said, but you have to go back before you go forward. Right. And some people can't go back. They're afraid they'll die. And I mean, it's a little. I've had people run out of the room. That it just triggered again that they had something inside of them that was just tearing them apart. And there's a guy every time I see him, I hug him and say, "Are you ready, Jim?" And he goes, "No." I don't think I'll ever be ready. And I won't try to force that person, because my wife always reminds me, Wayne, you give your book to people and say, read it and see if it will help you. If somebody would have given you that book in your 30s, you'd have never read it. So I think that it's you have to keep searching and want to get well. Everything that I did was try to get better at being a person that people would respect. And by that, I think I built up some character where I could finally confront it.
Yeah, I think there's no question. And Mike and I were talking about this last night about the use of a therapist.
My gosh.
And you can't, if I said, hey, Wayne, you need to go see a therapist. Well, the reality is it's not going to be as impactful in your life if someone else tells you to go do it. So
True.
there was an aha moment for you. And I know in our family, we've started the use of a therapist as well with myself and my two boys. And I think when I was talking to Mike, my point was that I didn't want the boys to go to a therapist from it coming from me or because they had to go. In other words,
Yes.
it's almost like prehab or prevention, Wayne, is where you go see the therapist, develop a relationship before you really need to use them, And then when you need to use them, they're like that friend right there that's ready to listen. I think too many of us, we have a traumatic event. Someone says, go see a therapist. And you're like, well, okay, but I'm just going to go sit there and tell them my story and then nothing's going to happen. It's like your attitude will determine everything, I think, if you go to a therapist. And I just started seeing one, and I can tell you it's made a real big difference in my life.
Did you find, but I'm sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think, like I know in Angela's case, she had to be ready to push the therapist button.
That's what I meant.
And I think, Wayne, just like she had to make that decision, that's very similar to when you heard that interview on that radio and you were like, okay, I'm ready. You have to be ready to confront the truth. You have to be ready to get help. You have to be ready for all of this. I mean, in a perfect world, we as people who have, crossed the river, so to speak, and would like to help a lot of other people cross the river, it's easy to stand there and say, well, jump right now. I'll take my hand. I'll pull you right over. Well, the reality is they're not even standing at the riverbank on the other side ready to reach a hand until they're ready to. And we can't accelerate that process. Is that a fair statement, Wayne?
In my opinion, yes. It absolutely is a fair statement. And I also found that if you don't believe that your therapist is giving or listening to you, find another therapist. I went through 3 before I finally found.
Oh, yeah.
And the one thing that I also have found in helping people is to say there is no shame to go to a therapist. Even I can remember I paid it out of pocket because I didn't want to put it on my insurance, and my insurance company knew that I was going to go see a therapist.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And a lot of people have the shame of saying, I really need help. I have I believe this is only increasing because I have a psychiatrist group in my Vistage group, and they're adding 200 to 260 new patients a week.
Holy cow.
Yes. And that's just in the Maryland area.
Yeah, it's in one city.
That's amazing.
He can't hire people fast enough.
I want to segue just a little bit into sex trafficking. That's not an area that I've ever discussed on my show. Matter of fact, I've had 4 individuals on the show that have had sex abuse. 3 have been women. You're the first male I've had, Wayne, that's come out and talked about this. So I applaud you for that. But let's talk a little bit about sex trafficking. We dabbled a little bit on the air before we taped, and I think I'm seeing more shows about it, more flyers out there at rest stops. I mean, there's more information out there, but how prevalent is it? And is this something that, we need to really be concerned of as parents?
Yes, I do. I don't believe it is as readily available in America as it is in the rest of the world. We have to understand that I was just talking to a Vistage speaker, Corinne Hancock, who's going to come speak to my group. And she traveled the world right outside of college, working for UNICEF and some others on child trafficking. There are parts of Africa and the Southeast where it's an accepted practice to sell your daughter or your son to live, to survive. And I believe we as a country don't even think about that. And I dread to see when money can be made by people selling children. It's dramatic.
It is. And I we talked again, I just popped into my head about being in survival mode versus living mode. The three of us are in living, we're in living mode.
Right.
We don't have to go out and find food. I got a place to sleep.
Nope.
Right. I'm for all intents and purposes, I got it made. And there's a lot of the world that they wake up and not only did they have a horrible night's sleep, but they certainly can't eat. They don't know how to. There's no food available for them. So we're not in survival mode. So for us to say we would never do that is, again, I like to believe I would never do something like that. It's no different. I was telling Wayne, Mike, about a study that came out about a poll that was given to people if they would have done the atrocities the Germans did during the Holocaust. Would you have been a guard to shoot kids and people? And everyone said no. Well, but the reality is, if you were in that situation, your family was going to be murdered or you were going to be murdered, who knows how you would react? So again, until you've walked in someone's shoes or slept in their bed, it's hard to really say how you'd react if you were in full survival mode, which none of us, fortunately, and none of my kids are either. So I just thought that was an interesting
it's also
dynamic.
very fair to say that this whole sex trafficking thing is a bigger problem in the confines of the United States than most people realize. I went to a speaking engagement about 3 or 4 weeks ago in San Juan Capistrano, which is just north of San Diego. And I met some people from an organization called Operation Underground Railroad. Have you ever heard of this, Wayne?
No, I have not.
They're the founders out of Salt Lake City, and it's quite a story. It's a whole 501c3 nonprofit that is really making a concerted effort to take this bull by the horn and kill it. I mean, really making a concerted effort to bury this problem and to try to tackle this problem. And my eyes were opened, to the fact that this is an issue more than the average person walking around out on the streets of the U.S. realizes. So just like I think the 1 in 4 and the 1 in 6, Jeff, you know how much that threw us backwards, right?
So being naive, I guess, are these the drug cartels? Are these, when you say sex trafficking, are these, is there a certain, I don't want to say industry, but, who's actually doing all this? Are these just strangers abducting people, or is there an underbelly of society where this stuff goes on? Or
That's a good
question. I'm not a well-versed person
I'm not either.
To child trafficking. I know enough to be dangerous, so I wouldn't want to venture. But
the answer is probably either thugs and criminals or people in desperation mode, right?
Yeah. Well,
it has to be.
They say the Mexican cartels are bringing them across the border like crazy now.
Yeah. Wayne, you were talking, let's see, I was trying to remember. You and I talked on so many different topics. I was going to mention something. I must have forgot it. But, going back to the average person watching this podcast, let's say they got a couple kids that are younger. What are the red flags you could give to parents? What are the things that you would say? And I don't want to create paranoia where every incident is going to be looked upon as this in this manner.
Right.
But there's certainly Wayne, and you would have more to comment on this than anybody that I know. But what would be some basic red flags that you would throw out there to help parents?
Number one, I think parents have to understand, and it's a hard fact to digest, but over 90% of children that are sexually abused are abused within the family or friends of the family.
I saw that.
So if you see that one of your children is being having a lot of attention, my uncle used to give me more gifts than any of the other cousins in the family. He paid more attention to me, and I'll give you an example. I've worked with one of the brothers of 2 brothers in a family where their church counselor sexually abused them. And he asked me, he said, "Can you talk to my father?" And I said, "Sure." So I walked into the restaurant to sit down, and he goes, "You really don't want to sit down at that chair?" And I said, "Well, why not? Why wouldn't I want to sit down?" He said, "Because I want to kill him." I said, "Well, of course you
Wow.
want to kill him, but what's going to happen to you?"
Right.
He said, "My wife and I, now looking back, and everybody that I've ever dealt with whose children have been sexually abused, the signs were there,
Yeah.
such as this church counselor volunteered to take them home. And my gosh, it was great. So we didn't have to go pick them up
Yeah.
after their church meetings. Or I'll take them this weekend so you don't have to worry about it. What parent doesn't like a break? It's affection that you see a child getting that are above and beyond. And I tell everybody, you remember when you were 11 and 12 and you would say you were in a group of baseball, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, you know, that doesn't that guy really give you the creeps? And everybody go, "Yeah, well, we ought to stay away from him." We as adults shut down that gut feel. For whatever reason, we don't want to believe that somebody would do that. But it's enough of the statistics bear it out. It happens so often that we have to get in touch with. Well, what if I'm wrong? Okay. So what if you are wrong? What's the worst that's going to happen?
Right.
Do you want your daughter at 30 years old telling you that Uncle Johnny sexually abused you? Or do you say, you know, I don't think you ought to be around it. You also need to let your children ask you questions. You have to be open about nobody. We created a coloring book, Safe Kid Club. And the best page in the book was a child in a bathing suit, a girl in a two-piece, and a boy in trunks. Nobody has a right to touch you that's covered up, but your mother, your father, and your doctor with permission. You know, it's amazing how many parents allow their children to go over to people's houses that they don't even know and then sleep over the night. And I'm not trying to be paranoid, but because of what happened to me, my wife and I were really cautious about who our children spent the night with. And I watched relationships that they had. If you see a dramatic decrease, I worked with a family where their daughter, and these were really close friends of mine, was an incredible student. And all of a sudden she started failing. They tried everything to get this young lady to turn around, and they were taking her to a mental institution to try to figure it out. And that's when she blurted out that one of their best friends who had a daughter their age, had a bedroom next door to where his daughter slept, and there was only one bathroom to use. And thank God she came through with admitting before they put her in that mental institution. And today she has two lovely children and very successful.
So Wayne, you know, Mike and I talk at length, and obviously by the time the show's over, I want to talk about the Living Undeterred U.S. tour that we're doing next summer, which your hometown will be one of our stops.
Right.
You know, in overdoses, the year our son died, it was 56,000 overdose deaths. Last year, we're on pace for 2021, 96,000, going from 56 in 5 years, Wayne. Alcohol overdoses are higher they were this year than they were alcohol deaths. You know, suicide attempts, suicidal ideation, and actual suicide is the highest it's ever been. So none of the statistics that involve quality of life and well-being are improving. Is that, I have to assume that the sex abuse numbers aren't any different.
I think that you're going to see more because more people are reporting than they have in the past. There's more organizations that are out there trying to raise awareness of what to look for. But I'm still amazed that when I speak, I mean, there's people that just have no idea how prevalent this disease is in this country, and how we as a society have covered it up.
I have a really strange question because I meditate, and there's a lot of things I do that I'm going to potentially do down the road that would involve, a deeper state of consciousness. Is it possible that some people just in their 50s all of a sudden remember, and they literally forgot for 30 years, and then they went to some type of I don't know what you call it, a sauna thing where they do the Native Americans do it. What are they called? I don't know what it's called. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. I just couldn't remember.
That's all right.
And all of a sudden they had a triggering event where they thought about this thing that happened to them. I mean, is that something that you see happening with any increase in frequency, or most of these things like your case where you knew all along and then one day you came out in the open and talked about it?
My history with dealing with people is they knew it all along. I've only had one individual say to me, yeah, after I heard you talk, I kind of remembered, but I can't they call it repressed memory.
Right.
I just don't have enough experience. I've just had one individual that happened to.
Well, there's a famous person on social media. I won't say his name because I actually haven't seen it, but I was told by somebody where he went on what was called an ayahuasca retreat, which is a very it's a root that they boil up, and then you take it and you it's like magic mushrooms or MDMA, things like that kind of take you. It's psychedelic basically, and he's a famous person, and he then remembered a sexual molestation that happened when he was a child, and so that's why I threw that out there, is that maybe talking about this can get people to maybe remember these things that possibly happened to them at a young age. And is that something that I think that we need to be aware of, I guess? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
Well, it's interesting that same psychiatrist that is in my Vistage group, he is starting to work with ketamine.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Psychedelics, which apparently now, for most of us who go through child sex abuse or trauma like this, have PTSD.
Sure.
And this apparently with both of those drugs, they're seeing a major impact. For me, and and I've talked to you, Jeff, and Mike about this as well. My grounding and my faith really helped me. Mm-hmm. That I had something that I believed that. People ask me all the time, said, well, how could you believe in a God that allowed you to be sexually abused as a 5-year-old? Mm-hmm. I said, It's a great question. If I had the answer, and I will have the answer one day, I would tell you. But I also will tell you I couldn't be doing what I'm doing now if it didn't happen. So I look at that what I experienced, and this is what Monty Roberts, the horse whisperer, who worked with Queen Elizabeth and her horses. I got to meet him, and he challenged me. He said, Wayne, you have a gift, and you don't understand it's a gift. And the gift is that what happened to you was horrible, but it's what you do with that afterwards. That's true. That's when I started, and that's what you're doing, Living Undeterred, and having this tour, is you feel that you have a cause that I have to get out there and raise awareness, because I got lost about 10 years into my nonprofit with the statistics weren't changing and were we really making an impact? But when I went back and read my notes of why I started the organization, it was if I could save one child from being abused or heal one adult, then it was worth starting it. And but I know that I people that call me 5 years after the fact said, I don't know who gave me your book, but I just want to let you know that I'm no longer in doing drugs, and that I'm beginning to heal. And that makes it all worthwhile.
Well, I think this is a perfect segue to kind of the last 15 or 20 minutes. Talk about the Living Undeterred U.S. tour that we are doing next summer. And the reason why I think this is a good time to kind of move in this direction, and then we can wrap up the show here in about 20 minutes, is that Mike, your story, Wayne, your story, my story is less of a me story and more of a we story. It's about
Sure.
us. And in doing so, this tour was born, which was back in May of this year. And what do you mean by this tour? Well, actually, Mike and I were talking, and we came up with this idea to go around the country and raise awareness to support and change the narrative on mental health, substance abuse, and addiction. Now, your specific situation, Wayne, the traumatic event you went through can lead to many things. It could lead to drug abuse. It could lead to alcoholism. It could lead to the unraveling of your life. So the mental health umbrella, as Mike and I always talk to, kind of covers everything. Would you agree with that?
I will. And I add, people say to me, so what happens to you people? I said, we become drugaholics, alcoholics, workaholics, or eventually we kill ourselves. And there's a high rate of people that do that.
Yeah, and so the tour next summer is so needed. And Mike and I are constantly texting there. And another story out there, Mike, another famous person overdosed, or somebody committed suicide, or an athlete got drunk driving and killed a person just the other day, an NFL football player. These stories are so prevalent, and I think the tour next summer, for those of you that are new to this idea, the Living Undeterred U.S. tour, is essentially this idea where we're going to go around the country over about a 95-day time frame in an RV. And I'm inviting both of you to go. And I know Mike and I joke all the time because I have a cat. His name is Opus, and he's 16 years old. He's been through, life's thrown him some curveballs, like us all. And Mike always says, "Yeah, we're going to call the tour 2 Clowns and a Cat." So
sounds good to me.
Yeah, and you're not one of the clowns, Wayne. That's Mike and I.
I won't comment on that one.
No, I don't think
That's
you
too
need
much
to.
of a setup.
You're the sane. You're the sane one in this group. But I think here we are, 3 guys that have been through traumatic events, and we're laughing, having a good time. Life is a great thing to live, and we want to honor those that aren't with us, and maybe respect the events that happened to us, but we certainly want to live for the living. We want to do things today to benefit us and those around us. So
most definitely.
So the tour next summer is going to be awesome. You guys are going to be a big part of it. I know we're stopping in Maryland. Wayne, you've got a couple of connections out there in that area that some tour partners that we're going to stop at a facility, give a chance to hear all of our stories, raise some money, raise some awareness, hug a lot of people, cry with a lot of people, and then move on the next day to another city, another town, another state, and repeat this over again. And it's going to be the most humbling, most amazing experience of my life. And I have a feeling that I'll never come back from it. I think I'm pretty convinced that this will literally be a road that I'm going down. I'm widowed. I'm 55. My parents are still here. I don't have a lot of reasons, though, to be sitting here in my house every day. I don't have any kids. My kids are gone. They're in college or soon to be. I do have a beautiful 5-year-old granddaughter that was my son's child that was born three weeks after he died of his overdose. His daughter was born. So I have Brighton here almost every weekend, and I'm going to take her on the RV for a part of our trip next summer. So, and we're going to make a difference, Wayne. We're going to take all this crap, all this tragedy and trauma and unfortunate circumstances and pain and suffering, and we're going to do something good from and with all this. And think of all the Wayne Coffeys out there and the Antarctic Mikes and the Jeff Johnsons. There's a story, Wayne, I got to tell you that Mike's aware of this, but you're not. When my wife passed away, I was in her garage and we were cleaning stuff out. And some neighbors started coming over, and I knew them and stuff just in passing. And my wife and I were going through a separation at the time, so we each had our own residence. But I was cleaning out our garage, and the neighbors came over, and we started talking. And my full Antarctic mic kicked in, Wayne, where I started asking people questions about their life. Less about me telling my story and more about, hey, I want to hear about yours. Just in the 4 people that came over, We had one that was a grandmother whose grandson hung himself in the basement of her house across the street. We had another one whose brother got out of prison and overdosed like on his birthday the next week, drug overdose, heroin, and died. And we had another one that I can't remember what it was, but it wasn't a death thing, but it was a very traumatic event. But there was, 4 of us in one garage. We had 2 overdoses and a suicide, in one street, in one town, in one state. It's just jaw-dropping to me, the implications and the effect that we're going to have next summer going out there. And instead of waiting for people to come to us, we're going to go to them, and we're going to hear America. We're going to hear more Wayne Coffeys, more Mikes, more Jeff Johnstons telling these stories that in turn, the next 20-year-old Wayne Coffey that was sexually abused, or Nancy Barrows that was on my show, Danielle McLean. These are other individuals that were sexually abused. They can come out and tell their story and not end up, committing suicide at 40 or becoming an alcoholic or dying of a drug overdose,
Yeah,
well, and
absolutely.
I think this medium that we're meeting on here, this is a microcosm of what we're going to build. Because I do believe that imagine if there's 8 or 10 people that don't know each other. One's in Oswego, New York, one's in Seattle, one's in Rogers, Arkansas. But the common denominator are these traumatic events or these circumstances that are very similar between these people. Now they have people that they can go on. I mean, Jeff, you've never met Wayne in person, but yet Wayne's close enough through the commonality of your stories and through my relationship with each of you that you guys now can lean on each other to a degree, right? And I mean, to imagine creating that kind of bond for people, I mean, it doesn't replace a professional therapist, but it certainly builds a very solid peer group, which I think peers are a very important part of this equation. Are they not, Wayne?
Yes, most definitely. Yeah.
And
you're only as good as who you
that,
surround yourself with.
And if we can somehow forge that and help construct that, well, that's pretty beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, you think that most advocates for trauma and grief and even alcoholism, substance abuse, they say build a toolbox, And Wayne, I use the analogy a quiver. You have an arrow. Maybe one arrow is meditation. Maybe an arrow is God. Maybe meditation. Maybe one arrow is lifting weights and running on your elliptical for an hour every day. Maybe one is reading a book. Maybe one is working at the local humane society or going to work with elderly people. Whatever that arrow is, you want to have that quiver overflowing with arrows. So at any given time, you feel like you're falling off your proverbial wagon. Maybe you're considering suicide. Maybe you're going to have that drink that you've not had for 20 years. And you can go to one of those arrows, right, Wayne? And pull that arrow out and say, boom, I'm not going to do it today. That's what this is all about.
It is, and it's reinforcing that everywhere that we go. That there is hope. People at times just believe there's no hope and there's nobody that cares. So when you show up and to talk about what you've been through, and Mike talks about what he's been through, and I talk about what I've been through, people they open up. It's just like Mike said, I walked away after 2 hours because we both opened up. And that's what we need to create more and more of human beings who can be vulnerable. Because when you're vulnerable, you're going to attract people who need your help.
Wayne, I have a tough question right on that topic. And and I want you to answer this honestly, which I wouldn't expect you any other way, Wayne. Had you not came out and you were still holding this in, would you still be here today?
I'd be dead.
That's why I thought it was a tough question.
Wow.
No,
wow.
Yeah.
And I have the chance. I have 7 grandchildren to hug my grandchildren.
I love you, man. I'm so proud of you, man. I've got the hair standing up on my arm, someone asked me the other day. We went around the room at a meeting and said, "What are you grateful for?" And everyone said, "I'm grateful for my parents. I'm grateful for grandkids, or grateful for my pets, whatever." I said the most odd thing ever, and it just popped into my head. and then Mike, this doesn't surprise you because I say odd things all the time. We're on you, but I said I'm grateful for death. I'm grateful for the opportunity that death gave me to become a better human being and not a bitter one. And man, I tell you what, I love that phrase. And I'm not going to say you're grateful what happened to you, Wayne, but I'm sure you're grateful for your ability to come out and talk about it.
I am. If you would talk to my wife, she would tell you that it was cathartic for me at times.
Absolutely.
At first, it was really hard because you have to be very careful of you don't allow people's energy, negative energy, to come in. Because some people just want to unload, and you have to put up barriers.
Good point.
So that you can see more and more people, because it's, when people expose themselves to the level that they are of things that they haven't told anybody ever, they are so vulnerable at that point. You can't allow that energy. If you remember the Shawshank Redemption.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
When he could take that out, I liken that energy that he would take out of those people consumed him at times, but it saved those people. And I believe that your journey of going out on your tour allows this avenue of opening, so people can feel comfortable and be in a place where they're going to be accepted and they don't have to wear their mask. A mask is a horrible thing to wear, because what a mask tells you, I really don't love myself.
Exactly right.
I remember Mike saying, Jeff, the success of this tour will be less about us telling our story, but more about hearing others. And that really hit home with me. And I thought, there's a lot of people out there running around the country doing a lot of great things, yet they're spending almost all their time just rehashing their either traumatic event or their tough ordeal. And that's awesome, man. We need to have that. But my perspective is I want to go out and meet more Wayne Coffeys, get them to make the tour say, so here's a guy sitting around in Springfield, Missouri, let's say, that lost his daughter to a heroin overdose or a drunk driver. They're angry, they're bitter, they're not really sure how to deal with it, and all of a sudden this RV pulls in, these two clowns and a cat. And and this RV pulls in with this Living Undeterred banner, and the guy's like, well, what the hell is this? And he takes a picture of it, goes to the internet. Well, this guy lost his son and his wife, and yet he's out there doing these things in a context of positivity, doing something positive. I can do this too. I want to meet this guy. And that's exactly what I want the tour to be about, is people coming out of their closet, coming out of their caves, coming out of their prisons that they've built because of whatever happened to them. And we can do this together as a team. And there's going to be so many other Waynes and Antarctic Mikes out there that we're going to meet. And we got 7 months to plan this event, and it's going to be epic. And I have to think it's going to change a lot of lives. And I just hope, as I always tell Mike, I hope my cat can make it that long. He's 16 years old. And I really want him to go on this journey with us, Mike, with Pace the Penguin.
Well, you talk about, use the term coming out, right? Confronting the truth when Wayne finally crossed that line and he was ready to go. That's vulnerability. Vulnerability breeds vulnerability. And I really believe, just from watching Angela and just knowing what I know about Wayne, I have to believe that the more vulnerable you are, the more you heal. Mm-hmm. And I know in Angela's case, she was taking psych meds and all kinds of things for a long time to try to help her. It allowed her to exist but not live, because she was never healing.
Good point.
Angela didn't start healing until she went off of all those meds. And now I'm watching, and it's been 3 years, and I'm watching this person. Today, she is somebody that I almost don't recognize, other than the physical features. Her temperament, her disposition is completely different than what I knew before, in a good way. And it's only because she was vulnerable. And I really believe that the more vulnerable we are, that's going to give permission to other people. And that's going to start to cascade. And I really believe, Jeff, that we're going to run it. I mean, the cascading effect is going to touch somebody first in Iowa, and it's going to go to Nebraska or whatever the steps are. And somebody down the line, 17 steps down the line, is going to be the poster child story. We don't know where it is yet.
Absolutely.
It may not be you. It may not be Wayne. It may not. It doesn't exist here in this call.
Right.
It's somebody that doesn't know us yet, and we don't know them, because their level of vulnerability, and that might be their radio show moment, like Wayne had, where they go, "Yup, this is my crossing of the line, and this is where the healing is going to start taking place right now," and that is going to then become the catalyst to reach that next person, and it's going to end up being this, like a domino effect, and we just don't know where those dominoes are.
Well, my experience tells you you're set up. I have never, and this is an absolute where I can say never, had a speaking engagement where nobody came up after and said, "Can I talk to you about my story?"
Mm-hmm.
So you're opening up the avenue for people to feel vulnerable because you're being vulnerable. I'm being vulnerable. And I've heard that over and over again. The only reason that I walked up is I felt that I could say something. And again, I'll go back to being able to finally take off that mask to somebody to listen. And I have to tell you, I have heard some of the worst stories that I never expected adults to do to children, ever. And the same thing that drives people to go to drugs. There's something, for the most part, that they're trying to medicate to get away from. And if we can open up their eyes that there are alternatives, and that, to your point, Jeff, looking at death made me live.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I believe some people, they need an avenue where somebody is going to ignite what's in their heart and their mind that they really want to get out. It's almost like, give me the key to unlock what has held me back for, could be 40 years for that.
It was a slap in the face.
I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of it.
How fragile life is, and when you have these things happen, and you have moments where the sun hits your face on an evening where you're looking at the ocean, or you're on a par 3 and it's beautiful, and you want to hit your shot. It's like, then you smile and you think, all that shit that I took to get to this moment, there's something about it being worth it. There's something about me being alive, and that's why I think that if you could, and this is going to be hard to say, I don't have any evidence, I'm just going to purely guess. But if you could resurrect people that have committed suicide, my guess is that most of them would regret that decision. I'm just guessing that.
I would agree with you. I would absolutely agree with you.
And I say that to people when I talk to them and they're thinking about suicide. I say that comment because obviously once they're gone, I don't have the ability to say a comment like that. I only have that ability to say it when they're here. So that may be tough love. It may be a hard thing to say, but rock bottom for some people is death, like it was for my son. For others, it's prison. For others, it's drunk driving. But death is the thing we're trying to avoid in all these cases. So anyone out there that went through what Wayne went through, there is hope. There is a better way to improve your life, to live another day. And so I guess, Wayne, we'll wrap this up. This has been an amazing hour. It feels like 10 minutes. We could go on much longer. I know the three of us are going to do a lot of work together, even after the tour, to try to change the narrative on mental health, substance abuse, and addiction. But Wayne, what are some last items you wanna kind of circle back and maybe touch base on? And then how can people reach you if people want to bring you in as a speaker? What are the best ways to contact you, and how can people buy your book?
The book is on Amazon. They can get it from Amazon. There you go. Truth be told, that he gets it. And it's a very easy read. And what I mean by easy, you can pick it up. And the purpose of it being short and sweet was it's a tough subject. But at the end, the book tells you, and I'll tell you that as I'm sitting here, 67 years old, that it's so much more fun to live life than to have to go through life not living.
Well said. Well said. Mike, how you going to top that?
There's some song lyrics that I think about almost every day, and they apply to what we're talking about here, because this is obviously a discussion about battling and difficulty and carrying stones up hills. I mean, no question about it. And there's no quick and easy answer. But the line of the song says, the pressure makes us stronger. The struggle makes us hunger. The hard lessons make the difference. And the difference makes it worth it. I think about the lyrics to that song 7 days a week. I can't not think about it because it's so true. I mean, it is a struggle. I mean, to come out and confront the truth and be vulnerable is probably the hardest thing a human being can do in life. But yet it makes it worth it.
Well said.
Yeah, well, guys, I really appreciate it. I love you both immensely. I've only known you guys a short amount of time in my life, but you've been a big part of it. Very much appreciate everybody's support on all that we've been through here at Living Undeterred Project. Looking forward to next summer. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us through the Living Undeterred website. We need state partners. We need tour sponsors. We need a tour coordinator. We need a tour manager. We need volunteers. And we are going to change the narrative on mental health, substance abuse, and addiction. But we're not doing it alone. We're going to need a lot of help. So with that, I'm going to wrap up the show, guys. Thank you very much. As always, keep living undeterred, and I'm sure our paths will cross here very quickly shortly.